Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name is Akiko. I'm the Senior Program Officer for the UNMAS Syria program. We're very happy today to host this side event for Syria, jointly with UNICEF UNMAS and the Australian Embassy in Beirut, representing, covering the Syria program. And that we also thank everybody's availability to log in, also the panelists' availability. And we would also like to thank the Mine Action Partners for Syria. I would just like to remind you that the event is for registration and that you can use the chat box to ask questions. Let me just try to introduce the event purpose. The side event will provide an overview of the explosive ordnance threat in Syria and highlight the impact of landmine and explosive ordnance on children as well as people across the country. We would also be discussing challenges faced in the implementation of mine action activities. I would like to introduce the panelists now, and you can see that the theme and also the panelist is actually the embodiment of the NDM theme, which is partnership, perseverance, and progress. First, let me introduce you the panelists, Mr. Habil-ul-Haq Javed, Head of UNMAS Office and Representative in Syria. We also have Ms. Gada Kachachi. She's the Deputy Representative for the UNICEF Syria. And then we have Mr. Jonathan Thorpe, joining from Lebanon. He is the Humanitarian Advisor for Syria and Lebanon at the Australian Embassy. So welcome everybody, and thank you so much again for attending our side event. With that, I would like to pass the floor to Mr. Javed. Thank you.
Thank you, Akiko. Thanks all colleagues. I would also like to take an opportunity to thank my co-panelists, both Ms. Ghada and also Mr. Jonathan, connecting on this particular important topic to tell the story, especially the explosive ordinance aspect and its impact on the people in Syria, mainly the civilian population, and all together to highlight the need for response to this very important file, but mostly ensuring that the impact of the explosive ordinance on the people in Syria is well illustrated and understood. So with that, I would like to draw your attention to the screen. Please, next, if you can show the map for us. Yes, thank you. So looking at this map, it illustrates that the recorded intensity of hostility over past 5 years and its reflection. While the full scale of the contamination is not known, the impact of explosive ordnance contamination on communities is notably immediate and devastating. The extensive use of improvised explosive devices adds a further degree of complexity of the threat. Now, according to the information and assessment that we have, approximately 1 out of 2 people in Syria are at risk from explosive ordnance contamination. Next, please. In Syria, certain population groups are at greater or different risk in correlation with gender and age, as well as social role and their responsibilities. The assessment also shows that men and boys are at the direct risk, while women and girls are indirectly impacted. Among them, farmers and herders are at direct risk, while children are more vulnerable. Next, please. So this slide illustrates the constraints caused. The Explosive Ordinance contamination continues to present a significant risk for population living in areas having witness hostilities, but also for individuals returning to their communities, as well as for those humanitarian workers providing assistance. For example, on 27 March this year, 2 members of a local NGO were injured and explosive ordinance incident occurred in rural Hama governorate of Syria while trying to deliver or provide the humanitarian support to the people in need. Alongside, schools need to be assessed and also cleared to be able to be prepared for the children to go in safely and get their education. Next, please. So, as summarized on this slide, people on move and returning to their communities often are unaware of the danger or particularly at risk. Roughly 26% of all direct victims of explosive ordinance recorded in the past 2 years are IDPs. Next, please. Explosive contamination has severe socioeconomic implications for families and communities, depriving them of their livelihood and source of income, thus increase vulnerabilities or cost. Agriculture land and access roads are the most commonly reported contaminated areas, followed by private properties and other public buildings, including schools and hospitals. Farming and herding is the most common reported activity at the time of explosive ordinance incident, followed by traveling, moving, and playing. Next, please. So to deal with the reported contamination and its impact, mine action is needed in all lines of efforts to be boosted. So on coordination front, mine action sector is represented in all areas within Syria, which is the overarching level of Syria humanitarian response. At operational level, a mine action subsector is either led or co-led by UNMAS in all hubs. A mine action subsector was also established in Damascus last year, 2019, for the coordination of activities within Syria. In Damascus, UNMAS and UNICEF co-chair the Risk Education Working Group. Finally, in October 2020, a Victim Assistance Working Group was also established in Damascus. Victim assistance component is a cross-cutting in all sectors and much needed activity alongside others. Next slide, please. Here, I would like to draw your attention for some of the HRP aspects. Since 2016, in Humanitarian Response Plan, it has been increasingly shown that mine action is a priority, including risk education, victim assistance, and explosive ordinance survey and clearance. All pillars of mine action are recognized as a priority in the Humanitarian Response Plan for Syria. To date, the mine action response in Syria consists largely in delivering risk education and assisting mine action survivors, whereas explosive ordinance survey and clearance remain to be expanded and worked on in all areas within Syria. I will stop here, and I would like to leave the floor for my colleague Ghada from UNICEF to give her thoughts and also briefing on the other points that are to be covered in this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Javid, and thank you all for giving me this opportunity. I'm very pleased to be with you today and to present the work of UNICEF and its partners in Syria. UNICEF work in humanitarian response is guided by the core commitments of children in humanitarian action. This is a core policy and framework for UNICEF grounded by the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which was ratified by Syria. The core commitments has high importance for the rights of children and communities to access age-appropriate and gender-sensitive education about the risks of explosive weapons. In Syria, since 2012, risk education has been a key component of UNICEF prevention and response program and is being implemented in coordination with a wide range of partners. Next. As mentioned maybe before during this conference, explosive ordinance pose serious protection risks for civilians, especially children. Globally, children make up to 54% of the civilian casualties of explosive ordinance and are at particular risk. When they walk to school, participate in income-generating activities such as farming and herding, or while they play. Since the beginning of the conflict in Syria until end of 2020, there are around 12,000 children killed or maimed in Syria due to the conflict. 10% or 1,199 children have been affected due to explosive ordinance explosions. This is based on the available data verified on child victims due to explosive ordinance. The 1,199 incidents involves 483 children killed and 716 children maimed. 948 of these children were boys, 170 were girls, and 81 were of unknown sex, which this means that 79% from the casualties were males. However, we need really to look more thoroughly on the gender issue, as girls may be invisible, and specific consideration and protection might also be needed to address their needs. Also, comparison on a year-on-year basis shows that incidents resulting from explosive ordinance started to significantly increase since 2018. In 2020, explosive ordinance was the second most cause of child casualties in Syria. Geographical analysis on available verified data also indicates the trend that high percentage of incidents were or are happening in most conflict-affected areas. Next. As you can see in this slide, children continue to pay a heavy price from explosive ordinance and its impact on their families and communities. The likelihood of children's exposure to high risk is very high, such as death or severe disability, with injuries leading to lifelong impairment. Impairments among children are most commonly related to the loss of upper limbs, 25%, hand and fingers, 33%, and eyesight, 29%. Of course, this creates additional financial burden on families within a context where 80% of people live below the poverty line. Schools are often not accessible for children with disabilities, which also among the main barrier to access services for survivors of explosive. Children's injuries are aggravated by the psychosocial, socioeconomic, and protection consequences of the accident, as child victims confront lifelong difficulties accessing health, education, social services, and livelihood opportunities, and also may be difficult to access due to high levels of contamination in residential areas. And like many vulnerable children with disability, child victims of explosive ordinance are at heightened risk of violence, abuse, exploitation, as well as stigma and discrimination. Families may impose movement restrictions on children to limit their risks while moving around contaminated communities. This coping strategy may also limit children's opportunities to access services, as well as to socialize with peers and others. Children also who lose family member or who are living in a family with an adult survival also face considerable challenges from the loss or impairment of a caregiver or the household breadwinner. Next. As we are aware, this year's theme of the conference, perseverance, partnership, progress, and I would like to quickly touch base these three core themes on how UNICEF and its partners in Syria integrate those in our program. The first theme, partnership, UNICEF has been working with its partners on a holistic approach on explosive ordinance risk education program, as I mentioned, since 2012, to reach all children and caregivers in Syria. Efforts focused on scaling up and expanding partners in this area, promoting safe behavior and providing skills and knowledge to children, caregivers, and communities as a whole to ensure how best children can protect themselves from risks associated with these dangerous devices. UNICEF has entered into partnership on explosive ordinance risk education with around 27 partners, 17 NGOs and national and international. We work very closely in coordinating and working with 7 line government ministries and its directorates and departments at the local level. Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Social Affairs and Labor, Ministry of Information, Ministry of Religious Affairs, Ministry of Culture and General Administration of Palestinians refugees, as well as with UN agencies, specifically UNRWA and UNHCR. With this kind of partnership, we have really a wide coverage across the country, across all the 14 governorates. And I would like really to thank all our partners, government and national and international NGOs community-based organizations for their work with us and for their support to this area. The second theme, which is progress, and as a result of this progress, which we managed so far to reach nearly 2 million beneficiaries with the risk education sessions. This includes more than 6,000 risk education facilitators trained in 37 sub-districts across Syria, and also 1,800 humanitarian workers trained on explosive ordinance risk awareness in support of safe humanitarian access. And lastly, the theme on perseverance. In order to ensure sustainability of explosive ordinance risk education program in Syria, the risk education integrated into the school official curriculum in almost all grades and in different subjects. Next. As you also can see, the work uses a wide range of approaches and diverse modalities and communication channels to reach children, their caregivers, and camps like Al-Hol camp, but also in urban and rural settings. And our main three approaches are community-based approach, which through conducting awareness sessions for communities, such as through NGO partners, mobile teams, through adolescents participation, and through also religious leaders. The second modality is through systems, specifically education and health systems, working closely with the Ministry of Education and Ministry of Health and departments at local levels to build the capacity of teachers and health workers at the governorates of district and community levels to disseminate mine risk education messages either through schools, providing face-to-face sessions to students, or through campaigns such as immunization and polio campaigns to families. And lastly, the modality through media, TV, radio forums, which have been also utilized at national and local levels to raise awareness on explosive ordinance risk and different ways. As you can see in this slide, the success in mainstreaming risk education and the life-saving information with the major events of immunization and polio campaigns covering all 14 governorates has proven its efficiency in terms of coverage, reaching about 500,000 people in 2020, including hard-to-reach and besieged areas that were impossible to reach in other modality. Also, the integration has been very cost-effective using immunization team and logistics covered from the health sector. UNICEF is using also innovative modalities through integrated and multi-sectoral approach at the facility level across sectors and social services, especially across protection, education, health, WASH, as I mentioned, adolescent programming, and communication for development for the risk education through child-friendly spaces, schools, IDP camps, and in major events like COVID-19 awareness and health promotion. Also, the COVID pandemic has forced us to find other modalities on working and reaching beneficiaries through home visits, mobile teams, using messages to ensure the continuity of the program. And lastly, I wanted also to mention our work, UNICEF and UNMAS, where we jointly launched a huge national social media campaign on explosive ordinance risk education, sensitizing children and adults on how to avoid the risk of explosive ordinance and promoting behavior change. The campaign was through SMS, IEC materials, radio, social media, newspapers, children's animations, videos, and this included also joint SMS campaigns in the occasion of the International Day for Mine Awareness and Assistance in Mine Action. The campaign was done in collaboration with the Syrian government and telecommunication providers, MTN and Syria Tel, sending SMS messages out to all their subscribers at no cost. Finally, I wanted also to mention that for systematic and efficient sectoral approach, Explosive Ordinance Working Group is established, where UNICEF undertook the leadership role within the UN agencies as a subsector under the protection sector. The working group overall objective is to reduce the risk of injury from explosive ordinance among children and their caregivers, as well as among community as a whole. And I would stop here and thank you all for your participation and listening.
Sorry for this technical issue a bit. Thank you, Ms. Ghada, for the comprehensive update and intervention. So we will move on a little further. Can you click on the next slide, please? Can you hear me? Next slide, please. Can you hear me?
Hear you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. Can you click on the next slide, please?
Yes. Yes, give me a moment, please.
Thank you.
To which slide do you want me to go?
Just the next slide. Slide number 17, please.
Perfect. Thank you.
I don't know, it's not showing. But anyway,
can you see on the screen the slide number 17, which says survey and clearance? Okay.
I think it's somehow not showing here, but yeah, okay, then if that's the case, we'll proceed. So
I can confirm other people can see the slide number 17.
Okay, no, that's good. So moving on to the discussion about survey and clearance, I would like to mention that as this is one of the key work for mine action in Syria, for the land that is contaminated to be surveyed and cleared. So since opening of its office in Damascus in October 2018, UNMAS has been working toward the establishment of an expansion of humanitarian mine action activities across Syria. This is with the overall objective to reduce the impact of explosive ordinance threat on the civilian population, as well as providing overall coordination of mine action sector to address effectively and the most urgent needs. So the deployment of UNMAS first explosive ordinance assessment team in rural Damascus since August 2020 was a good opening for start on this front. The survey work still is going on, and will lay a good groundwork for the subsequent clearance operation. Now, while risk education continues to remain a key response activity, clearance is the only way forward to permanently remove the threat posed by explosive ordinance to the civilians in Syria. With many thanks to the member states for funding mine action operation in Syria, thanks to the government of Syria and other authorities for enabling mine action work, including the establishment of UNMAS in Damascus and Aleppo. However, so far the work done is quite limited, and a lot need to be done in this particular area for survey and clearance operation. We would there is need for further enabling. There is also need for humanitarian mine action actors, such as some of you may be joining in this event. The work in Syria for clearance is huge, and multiple hands and operators and organizations are required to deal with this in a time frame that we don't really have a long one. With this, I move on to the next slide, please, for the victim assistance. Yeah. I also would like to elaborate a bit on the victim assistance that is much needed. Explosive ordinance result in serious injuries or death, leading to the long-term physical and psychological trauma for survivors and their families, and also severely impacting the lives and livelihoods of those affected. In addition, to mainstream victim assistance into the humanitarian response, the working group establishment since October 2021 is enabling to further strengthen this work. So at this point, basically, I just would like to draw your attention that the support or the work for mine action in Syria is a huge one, and we certainly need to identify the level and type of contamination in all affected governorates in Syria, and have our response prepared accordingly. Whether it's going to be the response is limited to manual clearance, not only the mechanical, the innovations, and all other sorts of technologies that we have today in mine action to make use of them in Syria, to be able to deal with the type and level of contamination in a lesser time, and to enable people live in safety back to their homes, and able to grow food for their families, and to live a bit of normal life and to breathe. I stop here, and I would like to leave the floor for our colleague from DFAT, Mr. Jonathan, to give us his perspective from donor perspective of funding mine action. Thank you. The floor is yours. Jonathan, I think you are mute. If you're speaking, Jonathan, I think you're mute. We can't hear you. There seems to be technical problem. Can we get support?
If I may, in the meanwhile, I would like to basically sum up some of the questions that came up in the chat box, so that once we can address this while Jonathan comes back and the technical issue is solved. One of the questions that came on the chat box was a focus first on the EORE, explosive risk education. And there were some couple of questions about the EORE sessions for IDPs. And there was also what are the gaps for risk education awareness using some of the mobile phones and apps. So maybe Javed, do you want to address some of the things here?
I think we should. If we can hear Jonathan. Jonathan, can you try again?
We're trying to help Jonathan.
Okay. While we are waiting for the technical issue to be resolved, maybe Ms. Ghada can reply to the questions on risk education.
Okay, so the risk education, we had to use a wide range of modality to ensure that we reach you know, the majority of our targets. The problem is reach all those who own phones. We don't have exact data on the number of people in Syria who own phones, but definitely children. This don't reach children. That's why it's important to use different face-to-face and different types of awareness modality. We are currently conducting an evaluation for our awareness campaign and awareness program, and when we get these the results of the evaluation, we'll have better idea on the impact and maybe learn and draw lessons from this experience to strengthen our program and to ensure that whatever we do will have really an impact, more impact on the population. And we do sessions in IDP, face-to-face sessions. We also have volunteers and our partners, NGO partners, they reach those even in homes now with the COVID, the pandemic and its impact, which has made us really use different modality to reach the communities and to reach the children and caregivers. However, this has reduced the number of beneficiaries because of all these restrictive measures which we need to apply within the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ada. Can we try now, Jonathan?
He is trying to join again. Okay.
A bit pity. Okay, so yeah, just on the risk education, in Syria there are mainly two mobile networks, the MTN and the SyriaTel, and almost all subscribers were that the plan in a way was laid out that all subscribers receive the messages, and that has been checked to ensure that these messages are delivered. The Ministry of Telecommunication had been quite helpful. Jonathan, I see you again. Are you? Can you speak? Can you unmute now? No, I don't see you unmuting.
Jonathan, please try joining your audio with the lower sidebar where you can share your video. You can also share your audio.
We can try some other means, maybe to connect the voice and then display from here.
If you can connect with other device, it would be great.
Meanwhile, I see a question posed in regards to the capacity gap in mine action response in Syria and how long it will take. The capacity gap, I think I was explaining, we are at the early stage. The survey is just starting, and clearance is needed with all multiple assets, the full toolbox. And the first project that we are starting is basically in the rural Damascus, which will make the ground for the ground reality of humanitarian mine action that would help the communities in Syria, and the understanding of the humanitarian mine action on all fronts, whether by the local communities, whether by the authorities, that the package of humanitarian mine action is well understood and then expanded quite fast to all other governorates where there is a need for mine action operation to happen. So there is no estimate of time frame that we can give at this stage in the absence of the well-defined data or information throughout the country. So I stop again here. Jonathan, can you try again? Are you connected with him? Yes, your voice is coming through, and we are trying this to connect the two technologies together. So please go ahead.
Thank you so much, and apologies everyone for the technical difficulties. I didn't seem to be able to unmute on my end. But yeah, no, just want to thank the other panelists and also the organizers of the event for the opportunity to contribute. As Akiko mentioned at the beginning, I'm Jonathan Thorpe, Australia's Humanitarian Advisor here at the embassy, our embassy in Beirut, and I also oversee our humanitarian program in Syria. Australia has been a steady supporter of mine action with current activities in Syria, but also in Iraq, Afghanistan, Cambodia, and Sri Lanka. We've also been a proponent for the inclusion of mine action in humanitarian response efforts as part of the protection cluster, and partnered with UNMAS in 2018 to help it establish its presence in Damascus. As has been mentioned, and this is present on the slide, I've been asked to provide a donor perspective on the value of mine action in Syria. And so the question for me is really, why would a donor invest in mine action in a Syrian context? In Syria, Australia is working with UNMAS as well as other humanitarian partners to implement mine action programs. And for us, these include hazard risk education, hazard identification, as well as assistance to victims, including the manufacture and fitting of prosthetics. In the case of Australia, we identified two primary reasons to increase our support for mine action in Syria. Firstly, we identified it as an important means of protecting vulnerable civilians in Syria. And secondly, as an important enabler for other humanitarian activities and their outcomes. As my fellow panelists have detailed, a decade of conflict. Sorry, I think I lost you for a second, but hopefully I'm back. Has littered Syria with explosive hazards. While active conflict is increasingly concentrated in the north, the extensive use of cluster munitions and improvised explosive devices mean there are lingering threats to civilian populations throughout the country. As Javed noted, I think during his presentation, there's been an average of one explosive incident in Syria every 10 minutes for the past 5 years, which is an estimated 144 incidents per day. Survivors of these incidents place additional pressures on a devastated medical system, much of which has been damaged or destroyed by indiscriminate bombardment, and which is struggling to respond to COVID-19. Explosive hazard contamination takes an enormous human toll. Syria is a protection crisis, and mine action is a necessary and immediate humanitarian priority, with the objective of safeguarding vulnerable civilians. Donors should support it as a complement to other life-sustaining humanitarian activities. Risk education is a rapid and cost-effective means of mitigating the immediate threat posed by explosive ordnance. This is particularly true for children who may otherwise lack the awareness of such hazards and how best to respond to them. I think it was Javed who shared a human story, and I've got one to share too, which I think can help bring home the importance of these types of interventions. For me, the one that's really stuck with me is that of Lilas. So Lilas was is an 11-year-old girl who had recently returned with her family to their area of origin in northeast Syria. While she and her friend were playing in the area around their new home, they encountered a suspicious device. Lilas went to pick up the object, intending to remove it from the area, but was stopped by her friend, who had attended an explosive hazard risk education session provided by one of Australia's humanitarian partners. This led her to instead report the object to her parents, who arranged to have it removed. Lilas relayed this experience during her own participation in a risk education session. Thankfully, Lilas's tale ended well, but the same cannot be said of many others. As has been noted, a quarter of explosive incident casualties are children in Syria, with 40% killed by these encounters. And sadly, it's often while children are playing that they encounter these hazards with disastrous outcomes. The 2021 HNO identified that 70% of key informants had reported not having received mine risk education in the recent past. Work is needed to address this gap, including donor funding and incorporation of explosive hazard education into other humanitarian activities, as UNICEF has done through education and, as Ghada mentioned, vaccination campaigns. Donors should also consider funding mine action as an enabler for other humanitarian resilience building activities. More work is needed to identify, map, and ultimately to remove explosive hazards. The contamination of explosive hazards prevents internally displaced persons from returning to their home communities and endangers humanitarian workers who seek to provide assistance and basic services in conflict-affected areas. A quarter of Syrian communities report their roads being contaminated with explosive ordnance, while many damaged healthcare centres and schools are rendered unusable. Such contamination prevents the resumption of livelihoods, particularly in the agriculture sector, which I think has been mentioned already, with over 40% of agricultural land contaminated, creating massive risks for the men and boys who work in an effort to provide food and income for their families. This is particularly problematic as Syria faces growing food insecurity driven by an economic crisis. So donors seeking to improve the resilience of conflict-affected communities must also focus on reducing the risks posed by explosive hazards. Failing to do so presents protection risks for those we seek to serve and has the potential to undo the outcomes achieved by other humanitarian and resilience building programs. Finally, for many in Syria, mine action will come too late. As I think has also been identified by Javed, 2/3 of survivors of explosive incidents will suffer life-altering injuries. Access to specialized medical care, therapy, and assistive devices in Syria is either prohibitively expensive or simply non-existent. Donor assistance will be required to support survivors to recover from their injuries and obtain the assistive devices needed for them to resume their lives and livelihoods. In closing, I'd just like to thank UNMAS, UNICEF, and other organizations who are working in the mine action sector, both for their work in protecting the civilian populations in those areas and also enabling them to sort of, to recover. But yeah, thank you very much. And thank you also to Javed and Gada.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, for your intervention and further elaborating the need and the need for the actual work and the responsibility that we carry as UNMAS, UNICEF, and other UN agencies, but also the partners who to deal with the problem of landmine and explosive ordinance in Syria, but also shedding further light on the need and saying that how much it is needed to be supported by the member states because Syria, as we speak, the work in Syria is just starting in terms of mine action, and the need for funding to ensure that what we are starting can sustain and give a fruitful result in a short to medium term timeline. The necessary required funding is made available so that the action that is planned to deal with the problem can be undertaken as it is required, and the work is done, and people can live in safety in their homelands. That basically brings us to almost end of this presentation side. If there are any questions, we did saw some questions. Do we have any other question that is needed to be responded that we have missed? Akiko, maybe?
Hello, everyone. Hi again. Thank you very much for to all the panelists and to the audiences. We apologize for the technical glitch, but I hope everyone has heard sort of the core messages here about the impact of the Explosive Ordinance, and while step by step we have jointly progressed in Syria to address this issue of Explosive Ordinance. I was looking at the chat, and I think we have basically tried to address some of the issues, but please do, if you have any questions, please, this is the time for you to raise now, and we'll be happy to answer. Yes, Gada, yes, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight what Javed mentioned about the needs, and the needs is really still it's really enormously needed. It's extensive, and if we want to work in really addressing the problems, raising awareness, but working in a mine action integrated approach, the fund I think 30% of the needs still, which is very, very limited. And for children, I have to mention that our awareness doesn't focus on the awareness. As I mentioned, it's a multi-sectoral approach, and it has a component also with social protection. And now with the socio-economic situation and the deterioration on this in Syria, it's becoming really very important to help victims with support to the families. And we have introduced this cash assistance to the children with disabilities, including victims of mines, which is very important to help them also and help the family they need more support. They need to have more support to continue education. They need more support to find a way of income to the family. Their costs are even more. So all this is important in addition to other components of the mines. Thank you.
Well, yeah. Well, thank you. I think we have just four minutes left, and we can conclude the side event today. But yes, Kiko, you have.
I think there was one more question from the audiences. I'm sorry, I'm just reading the Mailamin Ekmash. Do you have any questions? We will be able to, probably the organizers will be able to unmute you. Or okay, all right. If that's the case, then I think I just want to just echo what everybody was saying. And for every year, there's a humanitarian needs overview that highlights the needs across all the sectors in Syria. And for last year, I think not just UNMAS, we're talking about the mine action sector as a whole, but I think less than 20% of needs were really met. So we would really like to highlight on behalf of all our mine action partners across all the mine action pillars, survey clearance, risk education, which you have heard from all our panelists, victim assistance. They are very much needed during the course of all the mine action activities. And as the Australian Embassy, Jonathan, has reiterated, mine action is an enabler for all other humanitarian activities, and it should be mainstreamed across all the humanitarian, I would say, assistance. So we would really like to jointly call on behalf of all our partners to basically increase support from all the donors, and we really like to emphasize that message on behalf of our partners. That is the message, and I just want to see if Mr. Javed or Ms. Gada has any final burning statement.
Ms. Gada? Nothing else from my side. I thank all of the panelists, and I also would like to thank those who took time to participate and listen. This event was, if I can say, more of like a traditional type, because we have we realized that on Syria this kind of event was needed to have the common understanding about what is the level of contamination, and hope this was useful to all. And if you have any further questions or want to know more about the contamination and the response needed and the support needed and the actions taken or required, we are happy to provide those kind of information. I thank everybody again, and we will close this side event, and have a good rest of the day.